who has taught students with hearing loss, grades K through 5, for 25 years at CID-Central Institute for the Deaf in St. Louis and in Florida Public Schools. She co-authored the CID SPICE for Life Auditory Learning Curriculum and presented SPICE Auditory Development Workshops for 11 years at CID, in addition to workshops and language instruction for students with hearing loss. She taught in the Deaf Education Master's Level Program at Washington University in St. Louis. Julia earned her Master's of Science in Speech and Hearing from Washington University and is certified by the Council of Education of the Deaf. Please join me in welcoming Julia. Sorry.
Thank you, Chelsea. Okay, I feel like a fresh start, so I feel like I should say good morning, but it's not. It's good afternoon. Was that feedback, Mark? Okay, just get my bearings here. We're going to talk today about speech perception and what I like to call the speech perception lens, which is just a way of looking at our lessons. Thanks, Mark. First, I want to find out what level of students everybody here works with. I personally, this year, in my first year as an itinerant, surprise, and I'm working with preschoolers through grade 12. So who else is working with preschool through kindergarten? Okay, how about elementary grades? Okay, and high school, middle school, and high school. Okay, so most of us, it seems, are working with multiple grades, of course, the nature of our career. Okay, so there's our speech perception lens. We've got some terms here that we've all seen before and may or may not recall, and may or might not be very important to what we do every day, but we're going to review those. And in this picture here, we, of course, are the cat, and I challenge you as we talk to think about what the mouse is, that the cat is investigating. Okay, here's our agenda. You can read it for yourself. I'm not going to read through it, but I do want to say that I can't walk up that far, so I do want to say that feel free to interrupt.
I think there's a volume control on your microphone that if you hit it one time down, it will quit that.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll see if that works.
I'm hoping. I just had a lesson in this, so maybe it worked.
They did say that, Mark said that this is the first time this has been taken out of the package, so it will be a learning process. Thank you for that tip. And I do want to say, feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to be throwing some questions out there, and I hope to get some responses back. So this will be pretty open. I visit the bathroom at least once every hour, maybe 45 minutes, so feel free to do that if you need to. It's right outside the door. Okay, and I think the most important thing up here is how can I do this during academic lessons? I want to make sure we have time to get to that. So if you feel like I'm going over information you already know and you just want to get to this part, feel free to give me a nudge, okay? Okay, here's our learning outcomes. You should be able to provide scientific evidence of benefits of speech perception practice. That's a biggie. Given a specific listening task, you should be able to identify speech perception skills needed to successfully complete that task. And then if you're given an English language arts goal, I would hope you'd be able to plan and implement some speech perception practice to go along with that goal. Important question, why is this topic important? Why do I need to learn this? Oops, wrong one. Give you a moment to absorb that cool picture. A couple of reasons, because listening practice has been shown through research to increase the benefit received from hearing devices. So I have with me today some articles if you need justification for adding auditory practice into an IEP. I have some articles, and if you want to sign up for me to send those to you, on that back table there with the two volunteers, There's a list, you can give me your email address and I'll send those to you. Let me check my notes here to make sure I don't miss anything. So speech perception for students who are using hearing assistive technology devices, that's why they're using those devices. That's why we're providing them as school districts, is so they can perceive speech. So why wouldn't we practice that with them if the research shows that they can do better with listening skills with that practice? So in my opinion, we can't afford not to do auditory practice with our students, even if you can't get it onto the IEP. That's why that last agenda topic of how can we sneak it in when we're doing our other instruction. Are there any questions or comments about that? Do we all agree that, and I'm okay if you don't, but that auditory practice can be beneficial for our students and that it's needed? Okay, I'm seeing some nods.
Where does it go on the IEP?
Oh, where does self-advocacy go on an IEP?
Actually, auditory listening goes under language.
Auditory goes under language?
Yes, in the state of Florida it goes under language, so don't let your SLP say that they don't need a language goal if they need auditory practice.
Thank you.
And it's addressed in the matrix there too.
And it's what?
The matrix.
And it's addressed on the matrix also. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, you're going to encounter lots of cute little critters here. So the acoustic content of speech. How many of you flash back to college programs when you hear acoustic content? Yay! Okay, and all that means is what frequencies go into making up the different speech sounds. And we're not going to get scientific here at all. We're going to be very practical about it. We're going to start by looking at the vowels, a real quick review of this little trapezoid that shows the primary location, and you'll see this on a bigger version, the primary location of where each vowel sound in English is formed, where it resonates when we produce it in the vocal cavity. Okay, we've probably seen this before. This is that trapezoid enlarged. This would be at the front of the speaker's mouth, and this is at the back of the speaker's mouth. So this tells us that ooh resonates more at the back of our vocal cavity. And then this would be high in the vocal cavity near the roof of the palate, and this would be down lower, the tongue or the floor. And so this shows, and I use these, I use the words because I don't know the IPA because I'm learning General American. So I learned it to pass the Whistles test and then promptly forgot it. So anyway, we're using words here in the, to show the vowel sounds. Okay, this brings me to why there are crayons and colored pencils on your tables. On the next couple slides, not necessarily on this one, on the next couple slides, it might be helpful for you to color code some things. If you don't have enough colors on your table, there's some vacancies you can grab. You can also use like slashes and polka dots to, to provide different markings for the categories. Okay, this shows diphthongs. Diphthongs in phonology are vowels that glide from one vowel sound to another. So bait starts as an eh and glides into an e. It's a. And bite starts with an ah and glides into an e. Ite. Okay? So diphthongs are very easy to perceive because they're longer than the other vowels and they have more acoustic information. They've got more sounds even in them. So we don't really need to color code those. But here we can see that beat, bit, and bet are more similar to each other than they are to the other sounds, vowel sounds. And this is based on research on speech perception. The research shows that the front vowels are similar to each other in how we perceive them, and the back vowels are similar to each other in how we perceive them. and the and neutral are similar to each other. Here's an aside, the is similar to all of them because it's kind of a component of all of the vowel sounds, especially when you bring in accents and regional pronunciations and dialects. But the important thing here, your takeaway, is these vowels are more similar to each other. There's another one down here. It's a, I think. So you would color code these to be the same color and these to be the same color because they're similar to each other. Are there any questions? Okay, so now we have this little challenge here. Which listening task is more difficult?
Question?
Question? Yes?
Yes. Now on that speech,
Can we go back?
sorry, yes, please. You're saying, I don't remember what you said. Couldn't it be different based on, like you were saying, localized and your accents and everything? My family's
Yes.
from Jamaica, and it does not sound like this.
Okay. So, yeah, this is very general, and honestly, I'm not sure if there were more than one study that contributed to this trapezoid, and I'm not sure if they used Midwestern accents. You know, I don't know, because I know, having worked in the Midwest and having had a student from Rome, Georgia, and I finally realized that I was correcting his mother's accent in his speech. So, yes, there's going to be a variety. Okay, so which listening task is more difficult? Discriminating between, identifying between said and seed or said and sawed?
More
So
difficult?
More difficult, yes. So we have and aw, or and e. Said and sawed is more difficult. So said, oh my gosh, is this slide wrong?
What?
Said and sawed. That slide is 100% wrong.
Yeah, it should be seed.
It should be seed. Yes, it should be said and seed. Thank you. Well done on that auditory perception analysis. Okay, let's see how consonants work out. Here we have a similar table. Captions are on mine too. The bottom row is frictional continuous. Fricative continuous. Continuous fricative is how I learned it. Okay, so here we have the, let's see without my glasses there. Here we have the manner of production. So what parts of the mouth, the place of production, what parts of the mouth are used. Bilabial is two lips. I had a professor on a matching thing on a test. The choice that matched bilabial was tulips, spelled like the flower. I was never so angry. Labial dental is the lips and the, right behind the teeth. So see how much I remember from my speech instruction? Dentals, alveolars. So this is based on, they're sorted based on their place. And then their manner of production is along this axis. Yes?
Could you give me an example of the bottom row since we can't see it, please?
Let me pause the, let me see if I can pause the captions. This is a new thing for me. Show taskbar.
Frictionless continuous. What are you using?
Microsoft. There it is. Thank you. See how easy that is? It's nice having you guys around. Okay, so it's, frictionless continuant. Thank you. So we have W here, frictionless, R there, and J there. Pardon me?
So most of those, I think, are called, if you guys ever read anything else, are called like glides or liquids, and they all kind of go together for that one. So if you ever hear that term, it would be the same thing.
And semivowels also,
Yes.
correct? Okay. So that's the ya, the and the wa. The ones that don't really articulate, there's no meeting of articulators. Okay, thank you. I think next time I'll put the captions along the top of this show. Okay, so are we okay without the captions for this slide? Anybody have an objection? Okay, I'll try to remember to put them on for the next. Okay, and in the consonants, and this is different than it is for speech reading. Acoustically, for listening purposes, they are more similar by their manner of production. Visually, we get more information from this, but for speech perception through listening, these consonants are more similar to each other than they are to the other consonants in the table. In case you can't tell, this is a different color than that. So we have p, b, t, d, k, and g. All the plosives or stops, and then the fricatives. Wow, my eyes are really bad. I have a problem where computer distance is one pair of glasses, distance there is another, and then reading is another. So, so the fricative column we have and okay, so if you're highlighting or marking, you want to mark across the rows. Any questions about that? Okay, so now we have bait versus mate and bait versus date. Bait and date. They are all hard because they have the same vowels. So when we talk about speech perception too, the vowels have more energy in speech, but there are fewer of them. So, you know, if you have 10 multiple choices on a multiple choice test, that can be harder than having 4 choices. So that makes a difference between vowel and consonant perception. Okay, anybody have anything you're thinking about how this might apply? What lessons? How can I use this? It's making no sense. Anything?
I was just thinking on the previous slide where you're asking which one would be more difficult. Bait and date with listening, but with lip reading, bait and mate, right?
Correct.
They look the same on the mouth.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And in conversations with colleagues, we'd be talking about this, and I'm coming from, you know, an auditory perspective, having worked on the spice and all, you know, just having that mindset, that lens, and we're arguing vehemently because we both know we're right, and then we realize we're talking about 2 different parts of speech perception. There's the visual and there's the auditory.
I think a big piece of this too is the assimilation that our mouth makes when it is flavored by the vowel that's about to come. So
Correct.
I know that my students have had a hard time if I'm saying sit versus suit and discriminating that because that S sounds different because it's automatically dropping for the oo as opposed to being higher up for the I. So they have a hard time with that too, of recognizing that S fricative sound because it's so quiet anyway, let alone then having it flavored by whatever's coming up.
Correct. So, it is flavored. So, her point was that a high-pitched consonant can be influenced by a low-pitched vowel that precedes or follows it. You know, it brings it down, the co-articulation of where they meet each other and you know, what comes to the ear.
And I've even seen that, like, when we've done a quick, like, ling test to check something, if they aren't catching the s when I'm way up high in my mouth, but if I drop that, like I'm about to do, or the SH sound too,
right,
they can pick up that second sound. Just
interesting. Okay. Any concerns or confusions? Anything you want to re-explain? Or questions? No? Okay, oh my goodness. I clicked 3 times and gave away the show. Okay, so the 4 types of auditory skills, and we're mostly concerned about these category names because of the response that we're expecting of the child and or the student, and what we want to keep in mind is the hierarchy, so that if we're working at a comprehension level with the student, and she's not being successful, well, can we make this an identification task instead and do some teaching with that? So that's why we want to review these. Detection is the presence or absence of sound. So this is the Ling test. Ling test is an identification test, but it can also be a detection test. So if I have a new cochlear implant user and I say E and she says ooh, I'm thinking that's not bad, okay? You detected a sound. If I do this and she says then I'm a little concerned. So, it does get to the point where it's a speech detection test in the beginning. But detection is, yes, I hear that sound, or I hear nothing. Discrimination is technically, is this the same sound or a different sound? I say I say are those two the same, or are they different? We use discrimination a lot unthinkingly when we mean identifications, and that's not a big deal as long as you understand what the task, the response is. Okay, so this is same or different. Identification is making a choice. So here's all the pictures of the Ling sounds, and I said E, and you pointed to the slider, whichever picture is referring to that. Okay, so you did identify the sound that came out of my mouth. You have a picture of a boot and bite, and I say boot, and you point to the picture of the boot. You identified. And that can be in a set of 6, 10. And then there's comprehension, which is hearing the information and doing something with it to produce a unique response. Okay, so here we have a table borrowed from Norm Erber. We can think about the length of the utterance that the student is listening to. It can be a phoneme, as in phonemic awareness tasks, or phonics tasks. It could be a syllable, again, back to the word building skills we do in early reading. It could be words, like sight words. It could be phrases and sentences, if they're building fluency and they're reading those phrases to build fluency. Or it could be discourse, which is just a paragraph, 3 sentences. It's just connected sentences. Okay, and then a detection task. The student's response is, I hear that. I hear that. Okay. In the SPICE curriculum, with new implant users, there's also onset and termination of a sound. And that would be a student with a flashlight like this. And when I start, you turn on the flashlight. And when my voice stops, you turn off the flashlight. So there's no speech reading, and it's E. So that's also a detection task. Okay, the identification task, the teacher says a word and the student repeats the word. And you can think of this as the student is just identifying for you the sounds they heard together. So you said supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and I repeated supercalidocious. Okay, so that's all I was able to perceive and retain long enough to get it back out of my mouth. Okay, and that's all, even for phrases and sentences. And then when we get to discourse, we can do continuous discourse tracking. So I'm not going to read a 3-paragraph text and ask the student to repeat it. That's not practical. But there is benefit in taking a text, reading it in phrases of 5 to 6 words or 3 words, if that's where the student's at in their language, expressive language development. And I'm going to read the text exactly as it is, and the student's going to repeat it back verbatim, including all morphemes, all markers. So if I say there were 6 cats sitting on top of the house, the student has to repeat back, there were 6 cats sitting on top of the house. Okay, and the benefit of this is it draws attention to the words we throw away when we're talking. There were 6 cats. Were is barely even there. There were 6 cats. And that's why we often hear from our students, there's 6 cats. Because that word just gets blurred into the R's in there and it gets lost. Sitting on top of the house. The split second. It's barely there. So what you typically get back from the student is, there were 6 cats. There are 6 cats. Hang on, you missed a word. There were 6 cats. There were 6 cats. Okay? And you go on to the next. Sitting on top of the house. Sitting on top house. You missed a word. Sitting on top of the house. Okay? And it's drawing attention to those words that make them sound like good English speakers. And to the morpheme markers that we need. If they're not getting that final S on there, if you're doing a running record, a lot of teachers are marking that as a reading error. And, you know, I tell my kids that, you know, if you don't say that S, that teacher's going to count that word wrong. And they're like, oh, yeah, I know, speech matters. So that's continuous discourse tracking. It's identifying what they hear and presented with continuous discourse. Then we go over to comprehension. So for a phoneme, comprehending a phoneme, the student might point to the letter or to the word that starts with that phoneme, depending on what the task is. To demonstrate comprehension of a syllable, the teacher would say it, the student would repeat and point to the syllable or point to the picture that shows that syllable. For words, it would be the same. And for phrases, it would, the teacher would be asking questions because now we have some language content there. For discourse, the teacher would read that 3-paragraph text and ask questions, and the student would answer the questions to show auditory comprehension. All of this should be done, this should be done without the student having access to the text, if it's an auditory task. We have an asterisk down here that some of these errors are not auditory errors, they're errors of decoding. So if I say, "but," and the student points to a D, that could be a decoding error, that's a letter recognition error. Okay, that's why each of these has the word repeat. Oops, that one doesn't have repeat. Okay, because you want to parse out if it's a decoding error or a speech perception error. The other benefit of repeating is that it gives the student that additional exposure to matching her voice to your production, to a correct production. So, and you can get a quick speech improvement in there if that's one of your goals. Oh, my last important point is, please do not do the continuous discourse tracking where you read sentences and chunks of 6 words at a time and then ask comprehension questions about it, because there's no comprehension going on. Not on a discourse level. There's comprehension of those chunks, probably. And they should be meaningful chunks if possible. But students cannot, and this is on the SPICE worksheet. If you have the old worksheets, they took it off of the revised. But this is actually a task, answer questions. And I always told people in the workshops, black that out. It's not a fair task. Yes?
Sorry.
No.
I just wasn't following that.
Okay. You want me to repeat that?
Yes.
Thank you. If I read a paragraph in chunks of 5 words, and I'm doing 5 words because that's what the student's memory can hold in order to repeat back. 5 words, 5 words, 5 words, 5 words, 5 words. The student does not see the text. It's unfair of me to say how many cats were sitting on the house, how many birds were in the tree, because there's no comprehension happening. So this and this have to be separate lessons.
Okay. So if they're doing that, you don't touch the comprehension. Once they're able to listen to the whole paragraph and answer questions.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying, asking me to clarify. Any other questions? Okay, so hang with me. Hang in there, we're going to talk about how to do this. So we're back to the cat and the mouse. If we are the cat, who or what is the mouse? The mouse is language. Anybody else? The mouse is the message. The mouse is the auditory input. Okay, that's what we're looking at when we're using the speech perception lens. We're looking at bait and date versus bait and mate. Okay, that's what we're going to do here. This is from Florida FCRR website. You can see I'm a little obsessive about including my articles because I added them in there. So what we have, in case you can't read it, Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack traded the cow for magic beans. Mother throws the beans out the window and they grow into a giant beanstalk. Jack climbs the beanstalk and frees the golden goose, and Jack cuts down the beans. So this was a sequencing activity. Oh, I'm giving away all my cuties. Okay, this was a sequencing activity. And my first question is, how could you use this for auditory practice?
Phrase sentences
So we're looking at phrases and sentences.
with identification, where I say repeat it.
Okay. Or we could do comprehension. So the students already sequenced them. I could, sitting next to the student, not across from, just to reduce that visual input, or you could use the lovely hoop. He's already sequenced him, he's talked about the story, he's retold the story. Now you say, okay, we're going to take 5 minutes and do a listening task. You point to the sentence, Jack climbs the beanstalk and frees the golden goose. Think, good. Okay? If they can do that, if they can do 3 of those, like falling off a log, you know, it's no problem at all, then move on to comprehension.
But can't you also do detection and discrimination
Ooh, how would you do detection?
with specific words or sounds?
Give me an example.
Like maybe the growing giant, or beans and beanstalk.
Okay, so tell me what the teacher does.
The teacher will read those 2 sentences and ask them to discriminate, like a book sound, or detect would be sound.
Okay, so we got this sentence,
Yeah, and then the Jack climbs the beanstalk.
and Jack climbs the beanstalk.
Yes.
And the student will do,
Detect the 2 book sounds.
okay, so I tell the student, I'm going to read these 2 sentences, and I want you to raise your hand when you hear the "b" sound,
Yeah.
okay? Jack trades the cow for magic beans. So the student's going to go, Jack trades the cow for magic beans. And then Jack climbs the beanstalk, and because there's a delay, right, before they recognize it, we got to allow for that. If you're doing that onset and termination task I was talking about, you'll, the first time with a new implant user, you'll get but each time you do it, they match you better and better. It's really cool to see. Okay. Okay, so we could do a detection task. We could do a discrimination task. I could say, what's the difference between these, are these words the same or different? Bean, beans. Okay? That's hard, especially when you're natural, and you use your natural speech instead of your deaf ed speech, right? Bean, beans. They're the same. Oh, listen again. Bean, beans. Give them a little more S each time. You could even do that detection task by saying, I'm going to read the same sentence 2 times and tell me if it sounds the same or different. Jack cuts down the beanstalk. Jack cuts down beanstalk. Are they going to hear that missing syllable? Jack cuts down the Jack cuts down the beanstalk. Jack cut down the beanstalk. Right, there's a discrimination task that's drawing their attention to that sound. Would you show the text for these tasks?
For identification.
Okay.
Not for detection.
Okay. So not for detection. And for identification, what would that task look like? Where you're showing the text.
Say I'm only showing just the title, and I said Jack and the Beanstalk. Tell me which word started with the B, with the fuck sound, and then I'd say, let me read it again. Jack and the Beanstalk. So that they would be tracking with their finger and then identify which word.
Okay. So she said, I would read the title and say, tell me which word starts with the "b" sound. Jack and the Beanstalk. And the student points to bean. Okay. Because the "b" is a very visual sound, that's where you want to make sure the student's looking at the paper or your head's turned a little bit. Try and remove those visual cues to get that maximum auditory reliance. I'm not a fan of the hand or the mustache or the itchy nose, because that's cutting down on auditory input, unless they're using the FM.
But doesn't that distort the sound a little bit too?
It does, and even when a student has the FM, they're still getting the sound field input from the microphone, so I'm just not a fan of that.
Was it 3 years ago we had the Dr. Susan Nitschauer came, and she said that the research actually shows not to use the speech hoop at all anymore.
Really?
That naturally they should just be using all the cues, because whether you're hearing or deaf or hard of hearing, we use everything. And so she actually said that we should stop using the hoop.
What was that? Was that specific to all areas of, like, to everything? Because as far as like taking data or tracking goes, if you're doing speech perception training for a new cochlear implant user, you have to know, like, are they hearing
For assessment, but not for your instruction.
But not for
For instructional, yes.
Gotcha.
Just like when you're reading, you want to narrow it down and isolate things. But she was saying for instruction, because truly, in truth, I mean, really, you're not walking around covering your mouth. You're using everything, and you're never going to have a perfect listening situation.
I thought the hoop was only for assessment.
I see. I still see it. I still see it
What was
used
her question?
instructionally.
What was her question?
Well, I thought you only used the speech hoop for assessment. I didn't think you really used it for instruction.
For therapeutic and intervention pieces, I think
Right.
you're going to be using it because you want to make sure that they're using their cochlear implant or hearing aid technology appropriately, right, exactly, and that it's effective, that they can detect these things, right. Which is, right, however you want to say that, like whether
That's how
it's more on the therapeutic end than functional communication.
Mm-hmm.
So the conversation was about whether the speech hoop should be used at all, and the points were that natural listening is the best to practice because it's realistic, and speech hoop can be used for assessment in order to determine auditory speech perception and removing the visual, and it can also be used in therapy for removing the visual in order to rely completely on the auditory. And the point I'd like to make is, I agree that all instruction is best done as naturally as possible, but there are times when you're in a restaurant talking to someone and this menu is right up in front of you, you know, and so there are times when that visual is removed and it doesn't affect a non-device user as much as it does someone who has less than perfect speech perception skills. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you might be getting to this, but this is where my brain's going already.
Good.
So you can tell me to hold off. But so going back to the slide that we were just at, Jack and the Beanstalk, right? We're assuming that this kid already has basic reading skills of phonics association, phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, to be able to do all of those pieces. What I see so many times as an SLP as well is that I've got language impaired kids, regardless of whether or not they have hearing loss, whether that's they go hand in hand or, you know, those are separate issues, where I could see how this would be a daunting task of all of those other language pieces, sequencing, comprehension, whatever. And I think that this can target all the above. Like, I think that's a very good thing. But I also think it's very difficult on that monitoring end and data end of sifting out, okay, what is this? Is this an auditory discrimination issue? Is this a perception issue? Is this a phonics issue? Is this the written word issue? Like, where does that fall? How do you do that? How do you do that in real life then with these kids that are struggling readers? And struggling, like, basic reading skill language stuff?
I think
I know, I'm sorry.
it is, and it's an excellent question because it's something that comes up every day, every year,
Right.
for one of the students you see, if not more than one. So I think we've got all those variables: language, speech production, speech perception, and reading.
Because I was actually thinking about this for like phonological processing for some of my speech kids even too, of just going like, can they even repeat that? Can they model this?
Right, and so then we add auditory, I said speech perception, then we had auditory processing, right, where everything's going in the ear just fine, and then we don't even know what happens to it. So I think you choose one of those categories. It's a good, interesting question to think which one you go to first. I go to the auditory because that's how I think. So I had a teacher recently with a kid with ASD who's struggling in reading and doesn't know if it's because he can't answer the questions or doesn't know the answers to the questions, right?
Right.
So I did a phoneme check where I just had the list of phonemes and I had the hoop, forgive me. I had the hoop and I said the phoneme and he repeated it back and I checked them. And that's for all the vowels and consonants. So that was a phoneme identification. And then I got a picture that had no text to it and asked him WH questions about the picture and determined he can answer who and what, as in what is Bob holding, and what color, and sometimes how many, but he can't answer where. With a preposition, he pointed to it, right? So where is and? The answer is on the ice or in the water, or however you want to say it, and he says there every time, right? So that's an expressive language thing. And then I guess you go to, okay, now we add the text, and I say the sound. I think I'm using the hoop again, maybe. I'm not sure, I have to figure it out. I say the sound, and he points to, you know, from a set of 4, points to the letter. I don't know, wouldn't it be great to come up with a battery?
No, I'm just like processing all this stuff because I know that this has been a long conversation happening within our district, and I think it's across everywhere. But like when we are talking about, and especially with kids with hearing loss, when we start talking about like the phonics instruction and understanding those basic reading skills, it's really difficult. When I've got that true listens kid, we're doing AD Ed or something like that, then I understand that's a little bit more clear cut with just straight on, let's do the spice kit, let's do this stuff, let's do more of that speech perception. But once we start playing around with reading deficits, in addition to that, it's hard to tease those out, especially if I also have other issues, like which most kids do.
And then, you know, is it dyslexia? You know, is it
right,
just
exactly. Like, where is this going? Right.
So that's why, that's almost where this presentation came from, is when I got to a public school and the teachers are telling me he can't read, he doesn't know his vowels, I'm thinking, does he hear the differences? Right. Does he know that S is different than it? Does he hear the difference between and it and and, you know, even on their own, and then when I put them in a word, can he hear them? So that's one of the things, because Gen Ed doesn't think like this. They think consonant, vowel, consonant.
Well, if
right?
they think that, they just say he can't read. Why? What's he not
right.
Reading? I don't know.
Long conversation.
Right.
Over dinner. Okay. Okay, so this task was reviewing science, wedge pulley, and inclined plane are examples of simple machines. I had to look up what's the opposite of a simple machine to do this.
Complex.
Compound. So I would have said complex, and I thought there's going to be a science geek in there. Okay, so let's look at this first and think about just this auditory input, assuming that student A has picked up the card, reads the card, and student B has to choose agree or disagree, okay? What are some red flags just in that auditory input? What are some confusions that might happen? Yes?
We don't have the vocabulary-based knowledge to know what a wedge, a pulley, or a plane are.
Okay, so hopefully this is far enough into the lesson that all the students, especially ours, know what these words mean. So the vocabulary could be a problem, okay? What could a student with hearing loss think this word pulley is when he hears it without any visual cues? Pulley. Bully. Can't think of any others. The reason I was looking up simple machines is you can get this answer incorrect if this sounds like it's opposite. So simple and compound, I don't really see that much similarity between those two. But that can be something you want to look at is, well, did he mishear this word? If we're in the context of the science lesson, he shouldn't be thinking about bullies because he should be familiar with the vocabulary, right? So hopefully that wouldn't happen. Red flag, students must undertake. Oh, okay. If our student A, who's I think this was a 4th grade lesson, intermediate. So student A is yes, thank you, that's my 10 minutes, thank you. Student A is a somewhat typical 4th grade boy, and he's reading wedge pulley, inclined plane, examples of machines.
Oh my goodness, no.
Okay? Now, is your average 4th grade student with a hearing loss going to say, I'm sorry, could you repeat that again with clearer speech? No. He's going to say, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, right? So our student has to hear simple in order to get this correct, right? So he could hear wedge and simple, and if he knows the information, pick the right answer, right? He could hear just 2 words, pulley and simple, right? Are they all simple? Yes, because they are all simple machines. It's a hard job we have, isn't it? Okay? They are not gold chains. They are simple machines. I was chuckling in our opening presentation with the different ways RMTC came out in the captions. RMTC.
You just missed the. You were talking about the hoops.
Yeah.
You kept coming up hoop.
Okay, so they're limited. Okay, this, I truly randomly chose the set of vocabulary from CPalms for a secondary, I think it was third grade. I'm sorry, 8th grade. I'm sorry, 10th grade. So see how I did that? 10th grade lesson. So what are some red flags auditorily here? Words that sound similar. B and T, they're both plosives. They both have the same vowel. Antigens, antibiotic, antibody. Antibody, antibiotic. And when the classmates are saying these words, is the teacher even sure which one they said? I'm amazed, now that I've gotten out of deaf ed, I'm amazed at the speech patterns of typical students. But that's a developmental thing. Leukocyte and lymphocyte. So here, I'm telling my students, now I'm going away from my auditory self saying, wow, let's just go to the visual. Lymphocyte, leukocyte, it's got that M in there. We have immune system response and immune response, and we have inflammatory response and immune response. We have helper T cells and killer T cells. These have the same number of syllables, the same stress patterns. So this could be a great auditory identification task. Put out a set of 6 of these words and say them as naturally as you can and imitate the classmates. Antibody. Margaret. Okay, we're down to 5 minutes. Oh, here's a good viruses. But I'm mostly familiar with primary and intermediate. Most of my students would read that word as virus because they've included that final S. They make it a single syllable word, which is the singular. And so that's an auditory task. And it can be there, you can go back to discrimination. Discrimination is a good fallback for error analysis. So when the student says, when I say virus and I say viruses and the student points to virus, and says virus, if I go back to a discrimination and say, okay, I'm going to say 2 words and you tell me if they're the same or different. Virus, viruses. If they say they are the same, now you need some suprasegmental work. Now we need some perception of syllables. Okay, let's go back to detecting that syllable. How many syllables do you hear? So that's mostly at this stage of deaf ed. We're now working, thankfully, up with the comprehension and identification mostly. But those other 2 are good tools to have to check errors. Okay, you could also read a definition and insert the incorrect word and ask the student if that's a true statement or a false statement as an auditory task. Any questions or comments? Yes?
I'm sorry, this is self-asked. Is there a certain program that you really support regarding auditory training for the students? I don't know how many itinerants there are, but having such a short time with students, I have the cast and trained in the spice. Are there any other programs where if anyone can give their suggestions of what programs they use?
So are you talking about the curricula for, okay, what auditory curricula do you use and endorse? Yes.
Not a curriculum, but just a resource. It's the
Here builder, here builder. I can see the little trademark thing there. It's yes.
This is like an ESC general thing. Everybody's really moving towards it, and it's certified as well for students with dyslexia. Phonics first, if you're working on phonics, blending, discrimination. Phonics first is that's been shown a lot of our
Phonics first. And Here Builder is by Super Duper. I'm not familiar with Phonics First. Do you know the publisher? Okay. I have a list of programs and curricula that I can put out for you up here afterwards. And it includes a new one that I found that was developed at a university with government funding, and now they've made the app available free online, and it's for Discourse. But it is clinician, it's intended to be clinician directed, but it keeps data. So the clinician reads the sentences, marks the errors, and mark the number of repetitions, and it gives you a nice little readout of that data. So for people who are challenged with time spent with students, I don't know how helpful that will be, but I was excited to find it.
Brain Spring. Sorry.
Brain Spring?
Brain Spring.
Okay. Brain Spring. For the Phonics First.
You know, one county was recommending, they were telling me that they are using the foundations.
We're doing that for phonics.
For Wilson.
But not necessarily for, it's more for the basic phonics.
It could be adapted.
But it has some multi-sensory
Yeah,
approach.
it
It's a
does.
foundations.
So foundations, but that's for
That's
It's
for
phonics
reading.
based.
So it goes into the whole, it's one of those that kind of aligns similarly to any like Oregon Gillingham based program where it's like multi-sensory for
That's what
phonics.
Phonics first is. It's already
There you go. So it'd be like a lips or a foundations, we use Spire. But it isn't gonna dig in as deep as this to the actual like discrimination
right.
and whatever. And it does go up to different comprehension pieces, but it's not gonna come from like the angle of auditory awareness. Like,
Can you write the name of that on that paper back there on the back table before you go?
Foundations can be
Or
adapted.
post it for me?
which one are you speaking to? Any of
The
those?
foundations.
Yeah, sure.
What does that begin with? An F or a P?
Fun F. And I was just, because I was Googling this earlier, and I was looking at, Gallaudet was recommending a bunch, because I'm trying to figure out what we can use other than an Oregon Gillingham base, because they're still relying so much on auditory input. And Foundations was one, because they did use so many different multi-sensory pieces. I don't know any of those do, but I think it's more friendly than some, like, and they recommended